We now start looking at two of Fairley's vids on Catholic symbols. But before we start, we need to draw an object lesson that will illustrate the folly of much of what he argues. Have a look at this picture. If I asked you who these guys were, you might think they were some sort of Nazi basketball team. But you'd be wrong. The swastika symbol had a history long before that of the Nazi regime, and in some Native American tribes, it's a symbol of good luck. In this case, this is a picture of a basketball team from a Native American school, dated to around 1909. The point is that anytime Fairley shows us a symbol used by the Catholic Church or anyone else, and assures us that it is occultic, or evil, or what have you, it'd be a good idea to assume he's wrong. Symbols have meanings within specific contexts, and it's not infrequent for a symbol's meaning to change over time, or as it passes through different people's hands, or sometimes two entirely different sets of people may use the same symbol without any awareness of what the other group is doing with it. It would be unfair to leave this point without noting the end of the story. The site I got this picture from also notes that in 1943 the Navajos abandoned their swastika symbol after the United States declared war on Nazi Germany. But notice that they didn't do that any earlier, for years before when the swastika was nevertheless a known Nazi symbol. Not only so, but their reason for giving it up was that they felt the Nazis had desecrated it. But here's a big difference. We don't serve a God whose symbols can be desecrated. He cleanses sinners. Are we really going to argue that he can't sanctify and cleanse a symbol? Or have us ascribe our own meaning as exclusively ours? I'll say more about that later. For now, let's consider Fairley's claims about specific Catholic symbols. He first tries to designate several Catholic symbols as being pagan sun wheels. For example, this one seen in an above view of the plaza in the Vatican. I'll give him a point for creativity on that one. The official explanation for that setup, by the designer of the plaza, Gian Bernini, is that it represents the maternal arms of the church reaching out to embrace its members. Now, in light of that explanation by the designer, which is thoroughly reasonable given the nature of the Catholic Church, why should we believe that this was intended to be some sort of pagan sun wheel? There is no reason, any more than there's any reason to think these guys are early Nazis. Actually, you may as well think that this is meant to be a pagan sun wheel, or this, or even this. And by the way, it's especially wacky to argue this because the plaza is an oval, not a circle. It's just as crazy to make a comparison between this symbol, described by Fairley in terms of a basalt offering table, pillar-shaped with a carved symbol of Baal on its side, with this symbol in the middle of the plaza. Once again, why not accept that it's part of the whole enfolding arms motif, unless you're looking for a problem? Otherwise, we may as well say we've dedicated all our railroad crossings to Baal. The last bit said about this plaza concerns that obelisk. Fairley says that this is a phallic symbol of Baal and is mentioned several times in the Bible. Actually, what Fairley refers to as mentioned in the Bible is today called a standing stone, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Here's one pictured on a major Bible archaeology site, and it's said to maybe be the one erected by Joshua. Here's a bunch more from Gezer. So, sorry, that's just a bit too much of a strain. As Freud says, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. And in this case, that's what we actually have. The obelisk in question is a sort of historical artifact, an Egyptian monument originally taken from there by Caligula in 37 AD. In 1586 AD, one of the popes, Sixtus V, had it moved from its original location elsewhere in Rome and did a triumphant reclamation job on it, so that it's now taken to be, as the official Vatican website puts it, a symbol of humanity reaching out to Christ. As part of that, an inscription originally inscribed to the pagan Roman emperors Augustus and Tiberius was changed to be dedicated to the Holy Cross, and a bronze cross was added to the top which is said to contain a fragment of the true cross. The matter is summed up by a series titled Rome, edited by Marcia Hall, professor at Temple University. Fairley has a cow over this sort of thing because he thinks there's some relevance here for Old Testament passages that ordered Israel to tear down pagan altars, which means he thinks that the Catholic Church is disobeying by not doing the same thing. Well, first of all, I guess he hasn't heard the news that we've got a new covenant in place. When Israel was ordered to tear down those altars, it was not only for religious but also for political reasons. God was the sovereign over Israel, which meant that erecting a pagan altar was sort of like political treason. In the New Covenant, God isn't a political sovereign. That means in turn that just raising up a stone wasn't the totality of the offense. It was also dedicating it to the pagan god. Now, if Fairley thinks otherwise, he not only needs to have a word with the Vatican, but also with places like the British Museum, which has this Assyrian obelisk on display in their collection. Maybe they're worshipping false gods too, do you think? In addition, despite Fairley's protests, the obelisk in question wasn't even a pagan altar dedicated to Baal or any of those gods. It couldn't have been because it's dated to around 2400 BC, long before Baal or Asherah were even worshipped. Some people think it was meant to represent the erect phallus of Osiris, but that seems to be more fantasy than fact too. In fact, we have no idea what it was originally meant to be, since unlike many such obelisks claimed from Egypt, this one has no hieroglyphics on it, which means it definitely isn't an altar or a standing stone to a pagan deity. That would be like saying blank paper is evil because someone used paper to print the Satanic Bible. I should also add that the normal use for obelisks was to publish news and information, which might include a dedication to a god, not to act as an altar for the god, much less represent their sexual organs. In the next bit, Fairley tries to have his cake and eat it twice. He's already said that the inner circle in the plaza at the Vatican is a symbol of Baal, because of the 4 spokes in the circle. But then he wants to ignore the spokes and exchange them for the obelisk, so that we have a so-called sun sign. Well, he can't have it both ways. In fact, why ignore any of the 3 elements, circle, spokes, and obelisk, and make this the symbol instead? Fairley wouldn't want that because then it wouldn't match either the sun sign or the Baal symbol. Not only that, but even by his own picture, it's not a dot inside a circle. It's a rectangle inside a circle. Next up, Fairley perpetuates a popular urban legend that the statue of Peter you see here was actually removed from the Pantheon in Rome, where he once represented Jupiter, a form of Baal. The official Vatican website says of this statue, that this was a converted statue of Jupiter is unlikely for another reason. When a statue of Zeus was made, he was usually, yeah. So where does this myth come from? The answer may be that it is believed by some that the metal used to make the Peter statue was previously a statue of Zeus that had been melted down, in the 5th century. Now you want to talk about a triumphant reclamation. Either way, there's just no reason to say with Fairley that this was simply a transplant of a statue of Zeus. Neither the history nor the appearance fits that story. And by the way, no, that's not a sun wheel on his head. It's a halo. Fairley's next complaint is that the right foot of the statue has been worn down by pilgrims kissing it. And in response, he quotes a Bible verse and says, "The practice of kissing idols is also borrowed from Babylon." Well, a couple of things here. First of all, whatever else you may think of it, the Peter statue isn't an idol. On that, you might want to check this vid where I explain about ancient images and how they worked. The Peter statue doesn't qualify on those counts. As for kissing, well, all I can say is that Fairley better have a few words with these people. Not to mention anyone who kisses their spouses or children. And if you think I'm being facetious, I'm not. To add to the disgrace, Fairley suggests that maybe Jesus was disgusted by Judas kissing him because it had a blasphemous connotation, placing him on a level with Baal. Well, no. Kisses were a standard form of greeting in the biblical world, and what would have disgusted Jesus is Judas's pretense at fellowship. Maybe Fairley thinks Romans 16:16 means we're all Baals. Fairley's next oddity on display is a point to Revelation 17 and the woman who wears purple and scarlet. He makes much of the fact that purple and scarlet are the official colors of Roman Catholicism. Oh, really? Maybe he'd better check the official Catholic take on these colors. We can also add that the Catholic Church makes use of other colors in other respects. The Vatican flag, for example, uses gold and white. There's nothing to suggest that purple and red are the Church's official colors. In fact, if anything, gold and white would be. In reality, this is a perfect example of what I said earlier, using the swastika as an example. Colors are common to all human societies and organizations, and inevitably some will use the same color to mean different things. Most of us know the use of purple to symbolize royalty, but that's in Western culture. In China, purple symbolizes spiritual enlightenment. In Thailand, it's the color of mourning. You can't just point to one and then another and claim they're the same thing. The next charge made is that the Catholic Church is the richest institution in the world, and much of that wealth was gained by immoral means. As it happens, I looked into this one when I was researching for a project. The idea that the Vatican has all this wealth is yet another urban legend, though it used to be true that it had a lot. I'll link in the vid description to an article that tells the whole story, but here's how it sums the matter up. I'm not expert enough on Catholicism to comment with authority on what Fairley says about the idea of Mary as a co-redemptrix. I can say that the statues of Mary he refers to aren't idols, for the same reasons we noted about the statue of Peter. But I'll close this one with a further thought about how Fairley argues about symbols. As we all know, the Bible says the rainbow is God's symbol of covenant. But a couple of decades ago, the so-called New Age movement started using the rainbow as a symbol of a spiritual bridge. Fairley would rightly say that's a perversion of the rainbow when opposed to the way it was used by God. But here's the thing. By the logic he's been using all through this portion, he'd have to conclude that the New Age movement is actually an enactment of God's covenant promises. And he'd also have to argue that despite what protests New Age people may make, the reality is known to the initiated. The point is rather obvious. You can't just compare symbols on a basic level and claim that there's some sort of ideological connection. You need to look deeper into the history and meaning and use of symbols to get at the truth. That's what we've done here, and also what Fairley has conspicuously failed to do. There's more to come in Part 25, but for now we need to stop and give Part 24 its grade, and it gets an empty tank. Yes, it's that bad.